No nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
Hello and welcome to the Terran Space Academy, where we help prepare you for a bright future in the space industry. Please don't forget to stay connected, let us know what you like, and help support our work on Patreon. We appreciate you. This is an amazing time in spaceflight, with humanity continuing its quest to expand into the solar system. The SpaceX Falcon 9 is still working with 298 of 300 launches going perfectly so far. One Falcon 9 blew up on the launch pad due to a faulty helium pressure vessel inside the liquid oxygen tank, and another blew up in flight due to a brace failing under a helium pressure vessel. Helium pressure vessels don't like us for some reason. The first CRS flight had problems, but was able to complete its mission. Since then, the Falcon rocket system has revitalized the space industry, with 91 flights last year, including 3 of Falcon Heavy. And there have been 6 more Falcon 9 flights as of 18 January this year, with the most recent flight being the Crew Dragon named Freedom, which carried 4 astronauts on the private space mission AX-3 to the ISS. Just saying the words private space mission to the ISS is an amazing statement, showing just how far we have come in the 20 years SpaceX has existed. There have been other successes also. The Space Launch System sent an Orion capsule around the Moon in 2022, and we watched as it landed gently in the Pacific Ocean. The only spacecraft on Earth today capable of returning from lunar orbit. More recently, the United Launch Alliance Vulcan rocket launched perfectly, proving that the Blue Origin BE-4 should be ready to fly the New Glenn. It is not impossible that Jeff Bezos' slow and deliberate pace will pay off in the future, especially if they come through with that nuclear engine they have a contract for. A New Glenn with a nuclear-powered third stage would get humanity to Mars faster than anything SpaceX has designed so far. But space exploration is never easy. While the Vulcan rocket worked perfectly, and the Celestis deep space mission was a success, the Peregrine lander, sent toward the Moon, malfunctioned, and was left to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere. Still a nice send-off for those memorialized aboard. The Japanese also suffered a moon failure. Their rocket had worked perfectly too, but the slim lander it carried was not able to keep its solar panels in sunlight, though it has a second chance as the sun slowly moves across the lunar sky. We also saw the launch of 2 starships. One failed to make it to space, while the second made it past the Kármán line after a perfect hot stage separation, and was on its way to try atmospheric re-entry near Hawaii, when something else went wrong. We thought there must have been an engine explosion, and there was. The ship had no payload, which took 100 metric tons off its launch mass. It was, however, fully fueled to simulate an operational launch. That meant it reached this point of its flight with hundreds of extra tons of propellant. The relative mass of oxygen to methane on a starship is about 3.7 to 1. To get rid of a few hundred tons extra, SpaceX decided to vent the oxygen. The mass of re-entry is extremely important, since kilograms per square meter determines survival. And SpaceX started venting the excess oxygen to drop the mass. But venting pure oxygen around hot metal is always dicey. Almost anything will burn in pure oxygen, and a fire started, which eventually caused an engine explosion, which forced SpaceX to activate the flight termination system. With a few modifications, such as loading less propellant now that they know it can go fully fueled, and giving the propellant more time to settle in the booster, the SpaceX Starship Integrated Test Flight 3 should make it to orbit. Whether it survives re-entry or not is a big question. I still think that for the upcoming moon missions, SpaceX should forget about reusability and launch a booster and strip-down Starship as a second stage to send a third stage onto the moon, where it would land with an ascent module, obviating the need for all those refueling flights. After lunar ascent, the crew could dock in orbit with an Orion capsule. The Orion could be sent by the SLS, as it has already proven itself capable of doing so. and we have one almost ready to fly. Although a propulsion module would need to be added, as the Orion is not capable of reaching low lunar orbit on its own. That being said, America isn't the only nation with plans for a future in space. India has been making great progress with a lunar rover, as has China, with its own lunar rovers and multiple crewed spaceflight missions, including their own space station. Private spaceflight is advancing in China too, or as private as anything gets in a nation controlled by the Communist Party. A private Chinese rocket company launched the first methane rocket into space, and have launched and landed a reusable methane-fueled booster. Some think we should disregard China's ambitions because of recent failures in their military readiness. I would argue that China does not plan to command the future from Earth, and is investing instead in the long game. An operational military base on the moon, with rail launchers, lasers, and access to lunar resources, would dominate the space environment. Nothing would stay in orbit, much less reach the moon, if the base commander didn't want it to. But, according to an article in the magazine Scientific American, this is all a waste of time. Titled, "Why We'll Never Live in Space." It casts doubt on us ever living off Earth. As many of you might imagine, I disagree. From the perspective of a space scientist, physician, and former officer in U.S. Space Command, I will respond to these arguments. Now, don't expect any ad hominem attacks, asking why a journalist feels qualified to make these arguments. Do you have the proper sheepskin on the wall to even speak on these issues? Do you even space, bro? When you do that, you've already lost. In our modern information age, anyone with an interest in a subject can study hard and come to a high level of knowledge and expertise. The author of this document is Sarah Scholes. Sarah is a space science journalist with a long history of excellent articles regarding advanced technology. And in this article, she does a great job raising valid concerns. Let's look at what these are. Sarah starts off by mentioning medical, financial, and ethical hurdles. For the medical arguments, she notes that humans evolved on and adapted to conditions on Earth, and how serious health problems have developed when astronauts have spent much time in freefall on the ISS, or especially when traveling outside the Earth's protective magnetic shield, as only a little more than 20 human beings have ever done, with only 12 of them walking on the moon. The main cause of these problems is radiation. Radiation on Earth is rarely higher than 2.5 millisieverts per year, and usually much lower. Radiation levels on the ISS expose astronauts and cosmonauts to about 300 millisieverts per year. The risk of cancer and other problems increase at any level above 100 millisieverts. This is a serious problem, as radiation levels on Mars will be an average of about 250 millisieverts per year, as the surface is partially shielded by the thin Martian atmosphere. And while the longest mission for any human to date is 437 days in space, set by cosmonaut Valery Polyakov, people should plan to stay on Mars for decades or even for life. On the moon it's even higher, with a radiation level of around 500 millisieverts per year. And in unprotected space on the way to the moon or Mars, it will be up to 750 millisieverts per year. A 9-month trip to Mars will expose you to as much radiation as living there unshielded for 2 years. We will need to deal with this problem. Low-gravity environments are also hard on the human body, as this lesson discussed, and this problem is mentioned in the article also. Humans are genetically programmed to lose muscle and gain fat. This helped our ancestors survive an extinction bottleneck, but it means that if we don't use a muscle to its capacity every 72 hours, it will start to shrink, and extra calories will be stored, usually where we least like it to be. Bones also start to weaken rapidly, without constant weight loading. In addition to bone and muscle loss, she notes that combined radiation and low gravity causes DNA damage, circadian rhythm disruption, vision problems, immune system dysfunction, and cardiovascular weakening. Fluid shifts may impair brain function and lead to glaucoma. Radiation will damage our internal microbiome. All of these are very serious problems. Life support and food production is the next issue. She brings up the failed experiment Biosphere 2. Biosphere 2 was a just over 3-acre sealed environment, inside of which was a botanical garden, simulating the environments of Earth's varied regions, with a lake, wetlands, rainforest, savanna, and desert. Biosphere 1, by the way, was considered the Earth itself. Biosphere 2 failed miserably. We'll get to why soon. Next, the article raises the issue of solar storms. These storms, generated by the sun, produce much higher levels of radiation than usual. An exposed astronaut, even in a spacesuit, would die. As a matter of fact, one of these storms would have killed some Apollo astronauts had they spent a couple more days in space. A heavily shielded storm shelter must be close at hand at all times. But even without these storms, the higher radiation in space causes our immune system to age faster, becoming less functional. It turns out that when we are young, we make lots of different stem cell lines in our bone marrow. These produce the blood cells that carry oxygen, prevent bleeding, and fight infection. Around age 75, these stem cell lines start dying off at a rapid rate, going from hundreds to just 20 or so. This happens much faster when people are exposed to space radiation. So how do we start dealing with these issues? First, let's look at the moon. While exploring Mars as soon as possible is a valid goal, the idea of colonizing Mars with regular people right off the bat is ridiculous. Mars colonization will take place in 3 main phases. First come the explorers, specialized astronauts trained in multiple disciplines, dedicated to exploration and accepting the risks and damage to their bodies. Housed in advanced habitats, these exceptional people will explore the surface and locate resources. We know these people exist. We are still humbled by their courage today, in the shadow of such danger and self-sacrifice that they displayed not long ago. These are the explorers who will establish the first outpost. The next phase, I call the founders. The founders will be a much larger collection of older people. It turns out that those over the age of 50 suffer much less from radiation exposure than do younger people. I did my space science master's thesis on this issue, and have put it on Amazon if you are interested. The founders will start building greenhouses and fully shielded habitats. What do I mean by fully shielded? If we bury a habitat under enough regolith, or put up enough ice or water shielding, several meters and 1 meter respectively, we get Earth-like radiation levels. There will still be some cosmic rays that get through, but that is true on Earth also. In fact, last year, one Z particle hit with 240 exa-electron volts. That's 10 to the 20th power, and the energy equivalent of a large brick landing on your toe from waist height. An even more powerful one was detected in 1991. These are going to punch through almost anything, but we have lived with them as long as we've been around. Once these shielded habitats are completed, by using available cave and lava tube systems, burying habitats, or tunneling and excavating, we will have normalized our radiation risks. What about outside the habitats? There is a simple solution to help here also. Simply put a centimeter or 2 of water-soaked foam around the outside of a spacesuit for Mars. The suit will be light on Earth. Then load it with the water when we get to Mars, shielding us from some of the radiation, as there is hardly any material better than water for this purpose. But it would make the suit very heavy, you say. Indeed, and that's a bonus. The gravity on Mars is only 1/3 that of Earth. At 100 kilograms, 220 pounds on Earth, I would only feel about 38 of those kilograms on Mars, about 83 pounds. But at a spacesuit that weighs another 100 pounds, with all my life support and survival gear adding even more, and I get to block some of the radiation, while keeping strong bones and muscles on Mars. Some of you might argue that my water layer would freeze, but in the thin atmosphere of Mars, with reduced convection, the big problem would be overheating. But this could easily be handled by a temperature control system. And that brings us to the next problem. Low gravity is bad for people. And before we start bringing down any young people or having children, we will need to build artificial gravity systems. These would need to be very large rotating habitats, at less than 1.5 RPM, like the gravity train that I designed here. This one is designed for founders, and would need to be buried in a tunnel for general colonists. Which brings us to the third phase. With a combination of fully shielded habitats, heavier shielded spacesuits, and artificial gravity systems, we would be able to start bringing down the last phase. Regular people. But you ask, what about the trip to Mars? Won't these people get too much radiation en route? Yes, indeed they would. which is why ships like these won't be taking regular people to Mars. These ships are fine for the explorers and founders. But by the time these dedicated pioneers have built the infrastructure, much larger spaceships need to have been built, either in orbit or on the moon. These are massive nuclear-powered Aldrin cyclers, able to transport hundreds or thousands of people at a time on a 90-day trip to Mars, with full water shielding and artificial gravity systems. These will dock with ships coming up from Earth, Mars, and the Moon, loading and unloading passengers and supplies. But what about a biosphere on the Moon or Mars? Didn't the failure of Biosphere 2 prove this could not work? Not at all. Biosphere 2 failed mainly because carbon dioxide, produced by the steel curing concrete, made the air inside toxic. But this is not a good test of space systems. Biosphere 2 tried to use organic solutions only to keep the atmosphere balanced. In space, on the Moon, Mars, or anywhere else, we will always be using technology and intelligent systems to keep our environment safe and healthy. Just a few of the Apollo-era carbon dioxide scrubbers, like I had down in the ICBM launch control centers all those years ago, would have solved the problem for Biosphere 2. To the author's credit, this article is not one-sided. Sarah mentions potential solutions to the problems she raised, explaining how experiments at the University of California in San Francisco has revealed molecular pathways that might prevent space-related changes in our bodies. Some of this research was performed by Dr. Sonja Schrepfer, who found ways to keep arteries from hardening after radiation exposure. Other solutions are being elucidated by Professor Dorit Donovael. Dr. Donovael works at the Translational Research Institute for Space Health, and she is researching ways to repair radiation damage to DNA. This would prevent the problems of accelerated aging and cancer, not just in space, but on Earth also. And this is a big reason to do space research. Bringing up the third objection, money. Money is a big problem. The article discusses space tourism companies like Virgin Galactic. First, let me agree. I also think that Virgin Galactic is doomed, if it continues to try to profit only from space tourism. Now, if they get a more efficient propulsion system, as I recommended in this lesson, Virgin Galactic could start supporting point-to-point hypersonic transport, which could eventually make it profitable. But it's important to understand that unlike Virgin Galactic, the space tourism ventures of Blue Origin's New Shepard and the SpaceX Axios missions are side projects toward a larger goal. The engines used on New Shepard are very similar to those that will fly on the New Glenn second stage, and allowing true private astronauts to go into space gives SpaceX more mission time. The article points out that taxpayers are unlikely to pay for true colonization. It cost NASA $27 billion to get one space capsule around the moon, something Apollo 6 did with a more capable system back in 1968. And it will cost trillions of dollars to colonize just the moon, let alone Mars. Where will all this money come from? Not all from the taxpayers, that's for certain. But the greatest payoff for space exploration is always what we learn along the way. For every dollar spent on the Apollo program, at least $7 was returned to the American economy in the form of technological innovations. Space will first become profitable with high-value payloads, not just expensive communications and surveillance satellites, but people and critical medications and supplies for suborbital point-to-point transportation and high-value scientific experiments and industrial manufacturing in low Earth orbit. There are some things that you can only do in freefall. 3D printing replacement organs is one of those things. In the United States alone, there are over 100,000 men, women, and children on the National Transplant Waiting List. Culturing their own stem cells, which we can do now, and sending up low-G vehicles, like the Cochrane space plane, will allow these people to get an organ made of their own tissues. This will save hundreds of billions of dollars for dialysis and anti-rejection treatments, as well as all of these lives. Add in Europe and China, and you are looking at trillions of dollars saved. Factor in products like low attenuation fiber optic and perfect crystals and pharmaceuticals that can only be made in space, as well as unique alloys, and you have your financial support. But we can go further than that. The recycling technologies developed for space will revolutionize our civilization, changing us from a throwaway species destroying its own environment to a green-powered, self-sustaining society. And even further, there is no doubt that finding medical solutions to radiation and gravity effects will save millions of lives a year. One of the greatest dangers of the aged is breaking a hip, either from torsion on a bone weakened by osteoporosis, or from the loss of muscle mass, making us unable to prevent a fall, and not providing enough cushion when we hit. If we can block osteoclastic and myotrophic effects for astronauts, we can do it for our elderly citizens also, adding decades of healthy life to the aged, which many of them might want to spend dancing in the lower gravity of the Moon or Mars, while those off-world colonies benefit from their wisdom and knowledge. But we can eventually go further even than this. Scientists are working out how to de-age stem cells and tissue, reversing them back to their teenage years, so to speak. Humanity will soon be able to replace failing body parts with rejuvenated new ones. Medical solutions like these can eventually lead humanity to functional immortality. As it spreads out to new worlds throughout the solar system, is there enough room for all these people who live such long lives? Let's look at just the Earth's moon by itself. We could use automated and remote-controlled equipment to eventually completely cover the moon's surface in pressurized domes, with solar power from the sunlit side sent around to the dark side, as the moon rotates through its half-month-long day and night periods. The moon has 38 million square kilometers, about 14.6 million square miles, of surface area. Every square kilometer has 1 million square meters, and the solar flux on the moon is about 1,400 watts per square meter. That means solar power systems at only 50% efficiency could provide 266 billion megawatts of power. These domes would have biodiversity ecosystems, with Earth cultures being able to replicate their homelands, and lunar citizens being able to experience any environment they choose. The moon alone could comfortably house 100 billion citizens, 10 times the current population of Earth. The average home on Earth is 2,500 square feet, which is 232 square meters. Every one of the 100 billion citizens could have a residence with 380 square meters, with a second layer of parks, laboratories, and industrial areas, equal in area on top. I think that those who are denying the viability of human life in space are thinking too small. Let us know what you think, and stay safe as we look forward to more space triumphs this year at Astra Pro Terra.